Hello and welcome back to PolyToots. By the end of this video, we'll be done with the modeling of this Jeep, or at least done with watching me model this Jeep. Either is fine. We'll kick this off with the easiest thing to tackle, the spare tire. Remember that Alt-D will create an instance, while Shift-D will just create a duplicate. We definitely want to keep all these tires part of the same instance. Once we get it into place, it's time to update it a bit. It's something I should have handled earlier on, but I didn't, and that's just the way it goes. I'm removing all of these faces initially to start fresh. You'll see me go back and forth on this as it's clear I haven't made up my mind, and I think it's important to show this as a lot of the previous stuff we've had has been quite planned out. But in reality, that's just for a tutorial. It doesn't mimic real-world conditions, so don't get frustrated if you're not working as efficiently as what you see in videos. One new thing to mention here, as I'm about to collapse down some of these edges, and you'll need a numpad to do this quicker, but we can make a selection here, then skip one and shift select the next, and then repeat that selection process with shift, control, and numpad plus. Now it will select every other edge each time we press it. I'll do the same on the back loop as well. Shift click this edge, skip an edge, shift click this edge, and then hold control and shift, and then press numpad plus again and again and again and again until you've got every other edge selected. Now just collapse these with the M key. Why are we doing this, you might ask? Because I'm old and I think saving like 18 triangles is going to matter. Also extrude and scale one extra segment on the back. Onto the jerry can now. It's a good idea to pull up some other reference of items like this instead of relying on the blueprints, as those can often be super vague. I'll be starting with a cube, and I know I keep forgetting to rename things, but remember to do as I say and not as I do. If you've grown tired of the constant reminders to reset your scale, you can always just position objects where you want them and then go into edit mode and scale down all the faces. We're technically not scaling the object, we're scaling the geometry that makes up the object. This leaves us with our scale still set to 1. I'm going to drop the top face of this down a bit because I know when I do the handles, it will get taller. I'll also hop into isolation mode with the / key. The 3D cursor is bothering me, so let's press Shift and S and select Cursor to World Origin. This just sends it back to 000 on the grid. As for the can itself, let's add a loop cut around here. Pull this edge down to create an angle. Then I'll extrude this face up and push the edge back a bit so it's not just poking straight up. I'll be using a mirror modifier on this as well, so let's get a loop cut right down the center, remove half the geometry, and then add the mirror modifier. From here, I'm just adding in loops that I think will help me get the basic shapes done. There's not much rhyme or reason, I just keep looking at the reference on the other screen and try to imagine where geometry would be. For the handle itself, we'll inset this face and extrude it inside. We'll need to enable clipping on the modifier again though, so we can get it to the center point perfectly. Don't forget to delete this face afterwards. Then we can select the upper and underside of this section here, give it an inset, and then right click and bridge the faces. Now I'll add a bevel down on this corner to round it off a bit, and I'll also unboxify the overall shape by pushing the side edges on the front in a bit, and I'll also do the same on the back. I'm just making some edge selections here to do a bevel on so it's not so flat looking, and I'll also drop back into object mode and right click to add the shade auto smooth modifier. Onto the cap now, and I'll use the primitives tool that allows us to add shapes on surfaces. Remember to hold shift to keep the aspect the same, click once to set, drag it out for the height, and then click again. We can't just join the cap to the can at this point though, as the mirror modifier would give us double caps, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to center the cap to the can by shift selecting the can, and then come up here to the location transform, hover over the x-axis, right click and choose copy single to selected. This will just inherit that specific axis location rather than all of them. Now just add an edge down the center of the cylinder by selecting these two verts and pressing J. Then nuke half of this object. Don't forget about the back face here as well. Now we can shift select the can and press Ctrl J to join. And that's it. Next up, we'll handle the shovel and the axe that hang onto the side here, starting with the axe. And to throw an absolute curveball into the mix here, we're not going to make this. Instead, we're going to download it. I can assure you this is completely within industry standards, because if you weren't aware already, deadlines are more important than happy creative people. And this is where websites like thebasemesh.com come to the rescue. There are a lot of places to download models, but this one is run by a friend of mine, and I can personally attest to the quality of the assets that you'll be getting. The topology is always super clean, and they even come with UVs to get you going. Also, it's completely free for commercial use. This is not sponsored content, by the way. It's a genuinely good resource, and if you're feeling generous, you can hop over to the Basemesh Discord and even contribute some assets yourself. I also hang out there a fair bit if you wanted to say hello or get some help with learning more about 3D. Links will be in the description. So after you've downloaded it, just drag and drop the FBX into the scene, leave everything as default and hit import. Then just move, rotate and scale it so the head of the axe roughly matches where it should be. Now for the handle, we could just box select some sections and drag it into place piece by piece, but let me introduce you to proportional editing. The button for this is up here, but the hotkey is O for O. That's cool. It does have a few fall-off options to choose from, but let's just leave it as default. Now you'll notice when I press G to move this selection, I have a giant circle cursor on my screen. This is the fall-off radius, and you can control it with the mouse wheel. You can see the effect it's having already on the axe, so let's get that down. With this, you can smoothly adapt the shape of the handle to fit the reference more accurately, and that's it really. Onto the shovel now, which is one of the more trickier props to handle. We'll start with the handle portion by adding in a cylinder, and because it has this section that splits off here, we'll start by chopping off the bottom half and adding a mirror modifier. Don't forget to also nuke the caps. Now just scale it down and move it into place. We're going to leave the clipping off intentionally for now because I want to extrude the shape away from the center to begin with. I've done this selection with the Alt, Shift and clicking, by the way, to grab the whole loop. Don't forget to disable the proportional editing. Again, the hotkey is O for O. Damn, I left that on again. Then squish this loop down a bit on the Z and keep extruding and moving to follow the reference. Let's select this first edge down here and then control click the last one to select the in-between edges as well. Then extrude it across and I'll hold the control key down to snap it to the vert on the opposite side. Select everything with A, press M and merge by distance. Let's get a loop cut down the center here, and we'll also enable clipping on the mirror modifier now and then pull this down so it's not so flat looking. Extrude these faces down for the actual grabby bit. Fill this gap by selecting the opposite edges and pressing F. Then just modify the mesh a bit so it's not so flat looking. Now we can just select these loops, extrude and scale it down to create the rest of the handle. And since we're using regular smooth shading, I'm going to make some selections to manually mark as sharp edges. It is looking a bit squished here though, and if that's happened to you as well, then just select all the faces and scale it back the other way to round it off a bit more. For the spade portion itself, my anxiety is already kicking in because this is a bit of an annoying shape, but so long as we keep it simple, it'll be fine. Simple things can be changed easily. So let's go ahead and extrude these edges down to where the shovel ends, and then in a truly barbaric method, we'll squish them down all nasty like. Then let's add in some other cuts so we can push them out to the outline of the spade. We need a loop going down the spade now, and much like how we added in the base for the gear section in the main body, we'll select these edges, right click and choose subdivide. Then just drag the loop down, and I'm going to weld up these verts using the add last option from the merge menu. Now we can add in another loop on top, which will allow us to shape the back of the spade a bit better. I also prematurely add a loop here. It will help us with some rotation we'll do later, but I got distracted by the thickness of the spade instead, which all needs to be thinned out. Then some minor tidy up with the flow of topology. And I'll also close off this gap at the end by extruding the edges down and then just merging the two verts that didn't make it. Now we can just start to rotate and move this so it looks a bit better. That's pretty much it, just some little tweaks here and there. I can't really explain what and why, as it's just tweaking things I find to be visually odd. I also mark a few more edges as sharp. I do have a face down here that doesn't need to exist. This was likely created when we subdivided the edges and dragged them down. I didn't merge anything after that, so if you're following to the letter, then you probably have some oddities here as well. So yeah, that's it. Remember to rename it and then just put it in place. Onto the exhaust next, and this one is going to be much simpler to tackle. I'm doing that complement sandwich method, but instead of complements on either side of a criticism, it's complicated meshes for the bread and one easy thing in the middle. But you know, hey, what can you do? So starting with the cylinder, pretty low segments, scale, rotate, and move it to this pipe section here. Then in edit mode, we'll grab this end face and using the control and right click feature, we'll roughly plot down the path. And then just a lot of tidy up to make sure it's wrapped behind the wheel and not in front of it. Now we'll extrude it out the other way and stop roughly where the main part ends. Then control and right click in the bottom view to pop out that last little pipe. We can then inset this face, extrude it back and scale it. Now grab the faces for the main part, E to extrude them, but right click to keep them where they are, then using Alt S to expand it out a bit. Then using regular scale with just the S key and using axis locks, we'll stretch and squish it to a better shape. And from here on, it's just a case of moving some elements around, like we can shift this part of the pipe across a bit, which will also give us some more freedom to tuck it behind the wheel a bit more. And just keep doing things like that, basically. We're not attempting anything crazy here, just squishing or stretching some things, moving parts of it around. You don't have to do exactly as I'm doing, just do whatever you think works well with the reference that you've gathered. Next up, we'll do this Blackout Headlight, which is an interesting looking piece and I couldn't really ignore it in good conscience. It might look like a lot to take on, but honestly this thing is easier than the shovel. Instead of starting with a sphere, we're going to add in a cube and subdivide it by pressing Ctrl and 2. All this does is add the subdivision modifier on the object with the levels set to 2. So you could do Ctrl 1, 2, 3, etc. And that's just how that works. We'll stick with 2 for our model though. So let's shade this smooth, get it in place and scale it down. Now because we're using a modifier for the subdivisions, you'll notice that if we go into edit mode with this, we can only edit the original box. So let's make sure we're in object mode and then apply this modifier, either via the drop down menu here or press Ctrl and A while hovering over the modifier. Now we can edit all the faces, and with this power, we'll start by removing half of them and then just extruding and scaling the open edges to create the correct shape. One thing that might help you out here is if you're just wanting to scale and then extrude, you don't need to right click after extruding to hold it in place. You can just press S immediately after pressing E. I'll collapse this last ring here, then pull it outward a bit and use Ctrl Shift B to bevel. Then I to inset this face and collapse that down too. And then pull out the vert a bit. I just want something a bit bulbous for the bulb. Wait, hang on. Is that where the word bulb comes from? Bulbous? Or the other way around? I'm not going to look that up. I prefer the mystery. For the bottom here, it's just some basic extrusions. I do use the S, Z, and 0 hotkeys to flatten out the last extrusion. And don't forget to nuke the faces on the underside either. We'll never see them. We can carry on with the rest of the shape by just pulling it out from what we already have. So these faces, for example, just Shift D to get those out, scale and move them to just sit over the bulb. Then grab the end and scoot it across. Now we can use F to fill in these edges. And on the bottom, I really did consider just filling it with one polygon, but instead I grabbed the 3 open edges, extrude, and then scale them in a bit. And then grabbing the 2 side edges on the inside only, just E, Z, and then S, Y to keep extruding sections out and scaling them inside the shape. And then F to fill in that last bit at the top. And the same for the open edges here, just F to fill. Now I'll grab the same selection of faces, Shift D, and drag them out even further. Then extrude, scale, and move them so it forms this sort of shape. Then with the open edges selected, same deal as before, E and then S to scale them in a bit. And I move the verts down here on the Z axis to line them up with the lower ones. Again, I'm holding the Control key as I move them so it aligns to the position of those lower ones. Then F to fill again, all the way around. Lastly, just a minor detail on the bottom bit here, the sort of flooring, I suppose. Just extrude it out, add some edges, stretch it. There's not much else to it. Tiny little tweaks to position and some proportions, and don't forget to delete the faces underneath, assign an auto smooth, and that will be that. It's really just the last tiny bits now, like handles, straps, tire, and jerry can holders, rear bumpers, and whatever else we find along the way. That actually sounds like a fair bit, to be fair. But yeah, like the shovel, for example, which is the wrong way around. So I'll just grab that and rotate it 180 on the X, and then also modify the verts a bit so it's angled in a bit more. I'll also move both the shovel and axe so they fit a bit better. Let's move on to the holders at the back, starting with the tire. I'll just add a cube, shift select the tire, and do the right click copy all to selected trick to move the cube to the location of the tire. Be careful here though, because the tire is actually still selected, so if you just try to scale your cube now, it will look like you just did a magic trick. Instead, just click on the cube to reset the selection, and then scale. Our object list is getting a bit out of hand at the moment, so for all these new extras we'll be adding in, I'll put them into a new collection. We can start this off by pressing M in object mode with the cube selected, and then choosing to add a new collection. Give it a name, and then press the blue button. I'm also going to dump some other objects into this collection, so I'll shift select things like the jerry can, shovel, axe, headlight, and press M, and now we can choose our collection to move them into. Also the exhaust, which I missed because it's hidden and also not named correctly. Back to the tire holder now. Really simple shape, just scale it down, get it into position, then select both that and the main body and hit / to go into isolation mode. Extrude the bottom face, move the edge across while holding Control to snap it to the other side, merge up the verts. Inset these two faces and right-click Bridge Faces. Alt-Shift and click on these edges here to get the entire loop, and chuck in a bevel with Control-B. Remember, by the way, that you can double-tap A to deselect everything if you're getting confused with what's selected and what isn't. Inset the bottom face, extrude it up, then flatten it out by scaling it by 0 on the Z. Move and scale it into place, then just remove the faces we don't need anymore, which will be this one, and this one. For the jerry can holder, you could just start with the plane and move it in place, but I'm going to duplicate a face out of the Jeep to get started. I'll also separate this into its own object. And before removing the mirror modifier, make sure you hop back into object mode and select only the plane we ripped out. Move it to the extras collection and remember to rename it. Then in edit mode, just squish and move it into place. Now I'll extrude the two side edges back, and I'm noticing the can itself could be closer to the Jeep. Add in a face down the bottom, then do a loop cut here. Grab the back two verts and lift them up. I'll also bevel and tweak that loop as it's looking a bit too janky, and then bevel the two corners here as well so it hugs the jerry can a bit better. I'll collapse these edges down because they're a little too close for my liking. And then we'll just chuck on a solidify modifier to give it some thickness, and that's that. Now for the bumpers at the back, and checking the reference, I realized yet another glorious mistake, which is that very early on we introduced a horizontal loop cut where the back wheel arch ended, but we never actually did anything with it. So let's select these faces and delete them. And then I'm just going to fill in this empty gap here, and then extrude these edges down to the center. Don't forget to merge the vertices afterwards as well. So now this part of the chassis has been revealed, we can just add on the back bar for the bumpers. We can do this easily enough by extruding the face out, and then extruding two more times, one on the left and one on the right. Don't forget to delete the interior face. I'll also just collapse these two edges because there's something wrong with me and I just can't leave it alone. And for the bumper parts themselves, let's just duplicate the jerry can holder. I'll still keep the solidify modifier on the object, but I'll press this little button here to just disable it from the viewport. From here, we pretty much have the geometry that we need, except for one face at the back, which I'll add here. And then we just have to move some birds around to match the shape. Then we can turn the solidify modifier back on and also add a mirror modifier since there is another one on the other side. We are now so close to being done with this. The last things left are tiny little bits and handles and straps, which are all going to be very quick to make. To reuse old tricks that we've already done before, I'll just Shift D this one vertex out of the main body, then extrude it along the Y so we create an edge. And then I can select that edge and press P to separate it into its own object. And you should know the deal from here. We're just making our own edge shape in order to convert it into a curve. And this is what we'll use for the handles. It might sound ridiculous, but Blender doesn't have an easy way to chamfer or fillet the points of a curve. I do believe you can get an add-on that does this, but for the most part, I usually try to make sure my mesh has the geometry I need before I convert it. But in this instance, it does not. So to get an extra point in, we just select 2 points and then right-click and subdivide. You can extrude points with the E key as well to get extra geometry in. Once you're happy with the shape on the back, we can just duplicate it down the side to create another handle and just again mess with the points and positions. One thing to watch out for is that we did have the mirror modifier on the original geometry when we extracted it from the main body. But then of course, after we converted it to a curve, we lost the modifier. So nothing got updated on the other side after that point. So let's delete this mesh piece from the other side. And while we will add a mirror modifier later, for now, let's just create some of the straps for the shovel and axe using the same geometry as the handles. Don't forget you can select all the points of a curve and use Alt-S to thin or thicken it. So now we will add the mirror modifier back on, mostly just for the handles, but we need to remember to apply the mirror modifier and then delete the straps on the opposite side. And instead of manually applying the modifier, we can just convert it back to a mesh, which we need to do anyway, and that will also collapse the modifier down, which is handy. There's also 2 little box things on the bonnet of this Jeep. Not entirely sure what they're for, airflow or something. Or maybe just stop the windshield from smacking against the paint when it folds down, but I don't know. It's a nice little detail and it's super quick to get in. So as always, I'll just duplicate a face out from the main body and then get to work. Lastly, as one other tiny little detail, we can grab the edges here of the main body, Shift D to duplicate them out, separate them into their own object and convert it into a curve in order to give us a nice little railing. Again, just remember to delete the opposite side after converting it back to a mesh and then re-add the mirror modifier. I'll also just grab a section of these faces, duplicate them out and rotate them to act as supports, and then just scale and position them in place. I know I said lastly, like 2 sentences ago, but actual lastly, before we dive into the next video for UVs and then eventually texturing, I want to introduce you to cavity rendering within the viewport, which you can enable up here in the viewport shading dropdown. Just enable cavity and it has options for screen space or world. I actually just use both and then mess around with the sliders. This is a purely visual effect. It is not something that we can use for our texturing, but it does make everything look nicer. And it can give you an idea of what you might expect later on when we do bake something like ambient occlusion onto this. And that's it. That's literally all the modeling complete. Congratulations, you did it. Or you didn't, I have no idea. As I said, we'll be tackling the UVs in the next video. If you're an early bird, then the videos might not be up just yet, but let that be a lesson for you to just always be late for everything. Employers hate this one little trick, literally. Also, don't worry if you haven't actually completed the model and want to jump straight into UVs, because how this exists in its current state without UVs will be available for free over on my Patreon, so we can all start off at the same state. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and as always, I hope to see you in the next one.